5 years of my 10 years being a vegan, I didn't have any issues with it. And I felt like this is the optimum diet for humans. 100%, I was sold into it. But then as I got to 2020, which was a turning point for many people, I started to notice some incredibly daggering, almost stomach pains. And it was very much like a self-diagnosis of SIBO, a bacterial overgrowth through eating complex carbohydrates. And the FODMAP, even though like the benefits generally are there, especially for me having been vegan for 10 years, I've realized like if I'm going to overhaul my body machinery from being a carb burner to a fat burner, that's something that might even take years to do. You know, in the context of becoming vegan, like an attack of morality. So I think a lot of people come into it now through social pressures, but for me, it was actually a spiritual awakening that I experienced in God, jump on the vegan bandwagon because of what's happening to the animals. The way it's been done is quite frankly barbaric. And so I think the morality overrides any sort of health concerns, although I think most people do believe that veganism is healthy as well. To start with, like I say, it was very much like a story of two halves, because it was a 10-year period that I was vegan for. 5 of those were spent in sort of like heavenly health. You know, there's nothing wrong with me, and I was preoccupied with other things, you know, being sort of like almost like an emissary and telling people about God and things like this. But then as I got to 2020, which was a turning point for many people, I started to notice some incredibly daggering, almost stomach pains, which I just didn't really think of as being diet related, because you feel like your diet is invincible to criticism. You feel like, well, I'm, you know, on paper, you're eating fruits, you're eating vegetables, you're eating everything that you're told is healthy for optimum health. So that sort of like became immune to any sort of like inquiry for me. And so I just sort of lived with it a few years, or at least like a year or two, before I even began to consider the possibility that it could have been my diet that was doing this. And it was very much like a self-diagnosis of SIBO, a bacterial overgrowth through eating complex carbohydrates. And the FODMAP, just to get into the issue itself, it was always to do with my digestion, but there was a sort of area of gray between, is that caused by the food that I'm eating, or is it ultimately caused by the stress and anxiety that I'm experiencing, which psychosomatically is sort of relegating my digestion as like a, you know, it's not quite as important as dealing with the immediate threat of whatever it might be perceived to be when you're experiencing sort of extreme stress, anxiety. So even still, it was me thinking, well, it's predominantly the stress. And I think that's absolutely involved. But now I know that, you know, it's not necessarily one or the other. They both work in this kind of vicious cycle. And so, yeah, it was going down the path of a low FODMAP diet when you begin to see the direct connection between certain foods that you're eating that are the causative, you know, problems behind the pains that I'm experiencing. But then as time goes by, it takes a long time for you to clear the condition. And so like you might just try an elimination diet for say a month and all is good whilst you're on it. But afterwards you eat an apple or something that's high FODMAP and you'll quickly realize that it's still there. So, and actually I'm still sort of in that zone where I've experimented with a lot of different diets. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't even go to the doctors because I know what's going to happen. And I know that they're not, they wouldn't even frankly ask, you know, what you're eating. And even if I did tell them, they wouldn't think that that is any sort of cause effect sort of relationship. So yeah, I never actually went to get it diagnosed as such. I'm more kind of like independent in that regard. I'd like to try and figure it out for myself. And it didn't take too long, I think, like even though I was ignoring it, once I started to, you know, become a little bit more serious and the pain was worse, it became more of a pressing issue for me. And that's when I found, I forget the name of the doctor now, but the doctor that's behind a lot of these low FODMAP diets. That was the beginning of me sort of realizing that this might take a long time to heal. Like I say, even now, having tried elemental diet and also like carnivore diet, you experience benefits to do with the stomach. Oh, the carnivore diet. Yeah, I guess I was coming to the end of my tether with symptoms. At the time, I was having my girlfriend at the time was sharing videos from people like Ken Berry and Dr. Anthony Shafee, but I was so militantly vegan that I would just get quite frustrated at the suggestion that I even watch these videos. And it does seem quite ludicrous. I suppose what initiated it was, my girlfriend at the time was saying, like, who made me aware of this possibility. That, and then eventually, I think, like with so many people, it has to become from themselves. And so a few months, perhaps even a year passed, then I was like, you know what, nothing is improving. I still can't eat an apple. I've got to just try this out, like I've got to try it out in the idea of it lasting longer than a month or two, like I tried with the elemental diet and like I tried with the low FODMAP diet, which the low FODMAP diet wasn't quite cutting it. The symptoms were gone, but that was about it, And so now it's like a case of, me going longer than, I did the carnivore diet for 2 months, and then I've dropped back to keto because of certain things we can get into if you like. But ultimately it was just the symptoms became so sort of pressing that I was like, hey, this is a last ditch. And I think that's something that you're hearing a lot of people say. It's the last option. It's like the last thing on the table for them is to do that. And so that was very much the case for me. And then I started doing it. I suppose immediately it's the relief of the stomach conditions, because that really is why I was doing it in the first place. To start with, I felt like that all the other benefits were manifesting as well, in terms of I run quite a bit and I was not having any lactic acid in my legs, which is almost always going to happen. So there's certain things that are the result of sugars or glycogen in the muscles. Like, given that your body has now stripped out these glycogen stores, there is no byproduct of lactic acid. So there were certain things that you hear about, the aches and pains, they got better as well. And you start really feeling like I've tapped into something, like I've seen through the matrix. Like all of my body, like my whole health feels completely different. But that didn't last actually for very long. And I don't know whether that's probably tied to what we were saying in terms of, it takes a long time to become a fat burner, to become fat adapted. And so right now I've dropped to keto because I still have these kind of like muscle pains and, aches and pains and things like that. And, to some extent, the brain fog. And so, I wonder whether that is quite as bulletproof as people make it out to be. But then again, it's because I'm not, I think, adapted to it yet. Even though like the benefits generally are there, it might not be what your body perhaps requires at that time. Especially for me, having been vegan for 10 years, I've realized, like, if I'm going to overhaul my body machinery from being a carb burner to a fat burner, that's something that might even take years to do. It's not something where you can just do a carnivore diet like I did for 2 months and expect to suddenly just be in optimum sort of ketosis. I mean, I can't even get into ketosis. I bought one of these like breathometers, ketone meters, and the only time I can get into ketosis is if I fast or don't eat. As soon as I eat anything, that's the end of my ketosis. It doesn't matter whether it's even just like almost pure fat. So I've experimented with a few things, and it's still a ongoing sort of work, I guess. I feel like there is probably a sweet spot in between where, and I suppose right now, fruits, having meat, like an animal based diet ultimately, because I was doing that for 30 years of my life before I went vegan, that I was omnivore. I didn't have any digestive issues then, and it was only the vegan diet that I think led me down a different journey. So I feel like it's people are often trying to sort of reach for what it is. Like, are humans herbivores? Are humans omnivores? Are humans carnivores? And it's like, well, it depends what you've been eating. It's like there is no one side. It doesn't work like that. It's like the more you eat certain food, the more your body gets built in a different way. And like we were saying earlier, it's all absolutely bio-individual. Your body is very intelligent. It responds to what it's eating. It builds up defenses against what you're eating or drinking. Like, for example, alcohol is, you only need to go out about 2-3 weeks in a row, and the same amount that you were drinking no longer has any effects to you. So it shows how wise the body is and how capable it is of, and perhaps that can be somewhat a dangerous thing, because if we are eating foods that are hazardous to us and there's not any immediate alarm going off, then we just keep doing it and not realizing. Yeah, moderation is sometimes key, and it's difficult to stay moderate with certain carbohydrates because they spike your blood sugars and all the rest of it. It's like you've got to just keep eating them to stay satiated, and you don't realize that you'll sort of become quite addicted. I think sugar is generally, like, even though the body needs it, it can be a very addicting substance, and it's something that I think we don't need anywhere near to the extent that we are. And going back to what you were saying earlier, if you look through history, it literally wouldn't have been available to us outside of a couple of months in the summer once the fruits are blossoming or whatever. Other than that, it's animal-based diet, and that's all there is to it. And it seems like since then the agricultural revolution didn't have too much of perhaps an effect to us, but now it's taken on a whole different lens where we're now thinking that we can genetically modify things and preserve them. It's not permacultural, it's coming from the other side of the planet. And I think that's, again, it's like a different iteration or devolution, if you like, of the human diet. It needs to be an experiential wisdom. Often it's only when people have come through hardship that they are motivated to become their own researcher. If you think of your body as kind of a laboratory, you're the one that best be the researcher of it, because you're the one that can directly communicate with it in a way. It's speaking to you, and whether you listen or not is another thing. But it's like you say, it's when we're eating such a variety of food, like we're often told that a variety is the spice of life. But it's like, if you think of that, if you could somehow use something as a placeholder to represent your stomach in a laboratory, like a big container, and every day you throw in there whatever you're eating, so you can see transparently, like you eat an apple, you eat a chocolate bar, you eat some fruits, vegetables, whatever, and then you blend that all together so you can see what it's like. How complex a concoction is that for anyone to ever wrap their mind around? What could possibly, so it could just be that we don't understand the relationship perhaps between chocolate and something totally innocuous like asparagus. Like perhaps there's some crazy reaction going on there between, and how long would it take for someone to realize the relationship between those two food groups? And that's why I think like the elimination approach is quite powerful, because it allows you to say, okay, let's just remove everything except for, say, meat, and then incrementally just add one thing and see how you feel. And then hopefully you can then isolate when perhaps a rash comes back, and when this is like, oh, hang on a minute, like maybe this is what it was. And then it takes a lot of hard work and dedication. And I guess like so many people are so busy that they try and outsource that to the doctor or the nurse. But it's something that I think like is much more expedited. Like the resolution to it will come about a lot quicker when you engage in it yourself and try and be proactive and do these kind of like experiments. If you think about the fact that you are what you eat, it's like a total, like, I mean, I didn't eat animal products for 10 years, and for the last 2-3 months, I was almost exclusively doing that for the carnivore diet. And I suppose to start with, because they claim that certain things like you don't need fiber, you don't need this, like, and I can see that if your body machinery is working in that way. So of course there are carnivores out in nature, like a lion, for example, there's no fiber, and yet they're able to navigate their digestion and motility, and everything works flawlessly. But that's because that's how they've lived their entire life. And so the statement that we don't need fiber applies only to someone that's already in that sort of machinery. So it is like trying to make one machine another machine, and it's not like we were just touching on. It's not a. It takes time. It's simple as that, really. And I think that's the thing that I have to accept, is because people have been telling me, you're going too fast, Adam. You're going, and I know that that's perhaps the solution. I like to do things very quickly, and it's like, okay, I'm doing the carnivore diet now. It's like, okay, I'm doing the keto diet or whatever. And so that might be a bit of a hard hit for someone that has been vegan for 10 years. And I think I've noticed that to be the case so far. People need to learn how to be their own doctor, need to learn how to critically think and not outsource everything to these experts online and definitely the sort of like conventional authorities, and just trying to listen to your body. Because I know it's like, there's so much going on psychologically as well, which can be quite hazardous. If we all listened to these videos, we wouldn't really eat anything, I think. So we'd be starving ourselves, because there's always almost like a pro and a con, perhaps to the exception of, grass-fed meat or beef. And, there's so many negative side effects to a lot of these fruits and vegetables. But there are also, conversely, loads of nutrients and things like nature is providing us with these things. So we just I think we're just species wide, we're in a process of trying to figure out, what's going on here. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it could be attributed to the fact that a lot of it is GMO, a lot of it is using glyphosate, a lot of it is fertilizers, herbicides. And if we could just eliminate those things, I think a lot of the issues might at least be alleviated. Yeah, I don't know whether food, for me, that's one of the things where I think there's quite a big leap between food and mental states. I feel like the mind would override those. I would say it's more so like related to other social implications, such as, simple things as human connections, like socially, isolation, alienation. These are themes that I've dealt with because of the spiritual path that I've been on. I know that sometimes people want to pin the mental state on the food, and I would say that there are absolutely some correlations there, but they are perhaps superficial in the face of a lot of the other aspects in terms of like depression. I think it's something that needs to be looked at holistically. But generally speaking, it's something that's there for me, and I'm now quite good at not kind of like, because of course we are to some extent what we think about, and as we think about things, I'm much more able now to change that thinking pattern quickly. So if you start thinking in a way that isn't conducive to your health, I can just switch it off and say that I know what's going to happen from this point. Like, you just get into a bit of a low, and then you find yourself in bed for a couple of days. Whereas now I'm like, okay, I can see what's happening. Like, I'm going to choose not to think about these things. But I suppose that's a slightly different subject to, I don't know whether you wanted to keep on with the, speaking of nutrition, but I guess all of it is nutrition in a way. It's like mentally, it's not a separate thing. It's like well-being in general encompasses a lot of the psychological side of things, as well as the nutritional aspects. I'd say that the mind is the source of all things, and like the body is actually a manifestation of the mind. So for me, it's like, if I was going to place weight on something, it would be on healing the mind first and foremost. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see these certain physical conditions also resolve. Even, for example, like, there's no reason, for example, like, well, perhaps I was going too far with the vegan diet, but other people are vegan and they perhaps don't run into these issues. So I think it's like, from one side of things, you have the material cause of illness, which is the excess consumption of sugars. So being vegan is like, you're building up a certain environment, which, if it's also met with a mentally ill state, can wreak havoc. But perhaps if you're mentally clean and you're mentally pure, then these foods won't have such a dramatic impact. I wouldn't be surprised if there's also, we were talking about earlier, but like, there's some sort of relationship at play here between the health of your mind and to what extent these foods will actually impact you. So I guess it's always a lesson as well, isn't it? Like, illness is a learning curve, and we grow and we learn various things from, and I think that's probably on a higher level, why we come here is to experience, to some extent, suffering and to overcome that suffering. And that's what gives me like meaning and reason to your life. Without it, it's, if you're just plain sailing, there's not much learned in the process. So I feel like it can be a blessing in disguise, and it's quite a good disguise at times. So I did Vipassana about a year ago. So that was like 10 days. You're probably familiar with Vipassana meditation. So that was quite an extreme sort of like course where you're meditating for the best part of like 10 hours a day. So I'm definitely not doing it to that degree, although at the time I was thinking I was going to. And I suppose I do meditate every day, and I think that's what led to my spiritual awakening. But it's not what people conventionally think of as meditation, because people think of meditation, they think of silencing the mind, quieting the mind, sitting down, lotus position, or whatever, lying down in bed. But I'm kind of meditating almost all of the time, in the sense that if I'm on the tube or the train, or I'm looking out the window, I'm driving, I'm definitely meditating when I'm driving. Like, it's almost like I'm not present when I'm driving. And when you're cycling, when you're walking around, I'm constantly imagining and visualizing. And I'm not, even though I might just be walking down a road, my mind is not focused on the sort of secular activities of my life. So I guess in a sense I do meditate every day, but then I'm not so much in and I think that's where I need to perhaps be a little bit more savvy with my sort of sleep hygiene, because it's so, when the evening comes, it's a perfect opportunity to read or to do something unwinding. My mind is just too hyperactive at times, and so I can feel sometimes when I'm in bed that I know this is going to be a bad night's sleep. And then when I have, the only time I know I'm going to get good sleep is when I've been driving all day. And so I've been in this meditative state for like 8-9 hours, however long I'm driving for. And I go to bed, it's the best sleep I can ever have. But then normally, like the next day, for example, I'd be wherever I was going. And now I'm back on looking at the phone, checking emails, checking this, and watching videos. It's just so much content. That's the problem today. I suppose it's about keeping yourself authentic, doing what you know is best for you in spite of the social pressures that you'll have. But then sometimes understanding that, for me, alienation is something that I've experienced a lot. Also, I was a bit reluctant to do carnival long term because you just get so much social pressure, and then that becomes more of a mental issue as well. It's just like, oh, I can't deal with this. But yeah, I think it's ultimately that there is, yeah, if you can stay sort of true to yourself, um, stay authentic, and you can overcome, if there are any health issues that you're having, if you become your own researcher, if you become your own doctor, if you empower yourself with critical thinking and try to see through some of the frameworks of training and education that we went through, then you can become, the director again of your life, and you can empower yourself to find out for yourself and have the capacity or open-mindedness to try these different diets as a first port of call, if it is something that you're dealing with in terms of digestion or whatever, frankly. So I guess, yeah, it's trying to, my message would be one of like of independence, in a way, of bodily autonomy and mental autonomy from any authority, even if they are on YouTube and they are saying some incredible things. It's about weighing it up for you and figuring out whether that actually applies to you. So I think that's really my message.